Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are here for another one of your questions about work. And today we've got one that feels especially relevant in this moment. I'm Roy, for those of you who are here for the first time, a startup investor in the future of work. And I'm here with Simon Mainwaring, who has just written a book building on a long-standing practice of advising companies. And I can let him share a little bit more specifically about how he's done that. But really, he's talking about a reworking of how modern business can function. And so today's question, Simon, and thank you for joining us, is as a leader, how do I rally my team around our organization's purpose?
It's a great question, and thank you for having me. And by way of background, my company, we work with large companies, small companies, global enterprises, helping them define, integrate, and activate their purpose. So this is really a practitioner's response. And the first way you rally your company around your purpose is to make sure that everyone's very clear-eyed about the reality of the world that we live in. We live in this world of constant crisis now. Even in the last 18 months, every company has had to deal with the Black Lives Matter movement, COVID-19, obviously, and also the climate emergency, among others. So the challenge for every leader is, how do I deal with all of these things at once? The solution is that your purpose is the compass, the rudder that will allow you to navigate through this. First few things you should do: collaboratively define the purpose with them so they feel invested in it. And then make sure you communicate that purpose to all stakeholders in your company, top down from the leadership to the organization, bottom up in the sense that celebrate and elevate those stories inside your company where you see employees bringing that purpose to life. So they know it's important, they know they're being seen, and then maintain it over time. So that means you've got to kind of have traditions and rituals like all hands meetings or CEO announcements or volunteer days to make sure you keep that balloon in the air so it doesn't just float to the ground and people think it was just marketing.
And so what are the situations where you see companies doing that particularly well?
More so than ever today, you're seeing companies, large enterprises and brands, smaller brands, articulate, have the CEO out the front, not only to their internal stakeholders, but to everybody out there in the world saying, this is what we stand for. This is our role in the world. That puts them on notice. So the companies that are doing this well might be a Unilever that his portfolio includes, obviously the Ben and Jerry's and 7 generations of the world, but also young startups like Bolt Threads and Modern Meadows that people might not know, but they're looking at the natural world and really defining a purpose that puts business in service of our future in the natural world, rallying employees around that. And then they show up as their full human beings every day. They stay longer, especially during the Great Resignation, and they're great advocates on behalf of the purpose for the company.
I'm curious, well, first of all, something you said, when we were talking just beforehand, was that there's some immediacy to this. When an issue arises, the company has to land right away. What did you mean by being a first responder?
It's critical now because, I don't think COVID-19 was a moment in time that we all hope will pass. And there's been a lot of dialogue around that. I think it's a pilot program for what the future will look like, where we are going to face 1, 2, 3, or several crises at once and find. In fact, Ryan, the new CEO of Patagonia, said the great challenge for leadership today is how you manage through multiple crises. And so whether it's a function of extreme weather due to the climate emergency, loss of biodiversity, things that affect your supply chain, another pandemic, social inequities, you've got to look at how you responded to COVID-19, iterate on that plan, evolve it, look at best practices so you can spin it up more effectively, not just to look after your employees and the communities you serve, but to make sure that your company will survive in terms of reputation, in terms of people still wanting to buy your product and talk about you through challenging times.
It's interesting. I want to ask about a current event in light of that, which is we just had the CEO of a company that is known for trying to do the right thing as its purpose, which is Starbucks, be the first responder and try to show up and talk to his workforce that is considering unionizing. And it seems to have wildly backfired. And I don't know how closely you followed that particular instance, but I'm curious about, when is it about crisis response? When is it about building fundamental conditions that are better, and what's the right way to think about that? And any thoughts you have on the Starbucks situation, would love to hear.
The Starbucks situation is interesting, and they had a sort of a backlash in and around racism. And, when they talked about it in 2015, 2016, and there's a lot of pushback against baristas who waded into this area on the strength of the company's recommendation. And I think, union is, to unionize is a wholly separate issue because it speaks to the power of employees, workers, or as they call them, partners inside their organization.
Well, not what the workers call themselves, right? That's what Starbucks calls them. But
that's what Starbucks, absolutely. That's what Starbucks calls them. As opposed to separate issues like social inequities or women's empowerment or same-sex marriage, which Howard Schultz famously defended in that stockholder meeting in 2015. I think, you can't blur these lines, but the expectation is very clear, which is that people will penalize a brand, including employees, if they don't take a stand on social or environmental issues that are relevant to their lives. But I would pass out the difference between, unionizing and an issue like, a social or cultural issue.
The only thing I'd say about that is we've seen some of this in tech, particularly, and I don't know Starbucks employees well, where the cause for worker organizing was the company's stance on. So, I mean, Amazon, the women at Amazon who famously organized to get Amazon to be more active on climate. So while I agree that they are separate, I also think they're intimately related in the sense that employees are not just organizing to necessarily ask for higher wages or better working conditions. They're now organizing to ask their company to take certain actions in the world. Or in the case of Google, and I'm not opining on the correctness of any of this, in the case of Google not taking an action, which was not selling their technology to the military for certain purposes.
Exactly. I mean, if you look at Amazon, Google, and Facebook, they've all faced great resistance from their employees over the last year over gender bias, pay scales, their response to the climate crisis. Or he said, look at McKinsey 2 weeks ago, 1,400 employees did an open letter to leadership saying, we're not happy about the clients we support because they're enabling the climate crisis.
My former employer, by the way, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So, to your point, these lines get very, very easily blurred. And there are certain, depending on which side of the table you're on, business realities that certain folks in leadership would push back against unionizing. Then from the workers' point of view, they'd say, if you're really inclusive and you really want to celebrate the well-being and the whole human being of your employees, allow us to unionize and have a collective voice.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about that is that in this moment in our business culture, we're negotiating which things are in bounds and not. We've seen some companies say, we don't want you talking about politics at work. But then employees say, well, what counts as politics? If I'm a person of color and I'm being harassed on my way into the office, is that politics talking about Black Lives Matter or is it not? And so I think we're in for this, and it sounds like you're exactly operating on this theme of how business leaders need to reinterpret what the line is of what are the things that they actually have to be responsible for. And sometimes what it will be is responding collectively to their will of their employees, sometimes to social issues, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, listen, it's very difficult and it's a fluid state and it's going to get more complicated as we face these compounding and interconnected challenges. But here are the table stakes. Every company, no matter your size, needs to address three things: sustainability and ESG, in terms of environmental, social, and governance metrics, the impact they're having on the environment, doing less bad, but also more good. Secondly, diversity and inclusion, and not just diversity, true inclusion at a leadership level, not just down, in the ranks of the company.
Two white men to one another, but nonetheless.
Yeah, two old white men together. Well, youthful.
I don't know. Youthful. Yeah. You look more youthful than I do. You certainly have more.
You know what? We are youth adjacent, Roy. That's
youth adjacent. I like that. I'm going to use that next time somebody uses the word generational on me. But what's the third one?
And the third one is fair and living wage. And you've seen that most notably in the restaurant industry, where the wage has gone from 13 to 15 to 17 to Amazon paying $20 an hour. I mean, you have to pay a living. Once you've got those three in place and you've got to do a self-audit and hold yourself accountable, you can address an issue above and beyond that as long as it's authentic and specific to your brand. It's not just bolting on a cause because it's
hitting the table stakes and then doing the thing you're meant to do.
Exactly.
So any parting thoughts before we wrap?
What I did was in Lead with We, my new book, I put this together because for 10 years, my company, We First, has been working with startups, VC, PE-backed companies, as well as Tom's and Timberland and others, And we put together programmatically how you can approach solving for these issues, social and environmental crises, the issues we're talking about, in ways that drive growth. So if you want to check it out, if you want to get something that gives you all of that expertise in a plan you can follow, it's now up on Amazon and it's at leadwithwe.com.
Or bookshop. For those of you who don't want to shop from Amazon, I do both, but thank you, Simon. That was excellent. Really appreciate it. And for those of you who are out there and maybe watching for the first time, we get these questions from you, from our guests. Feel free to engage, respond, find us on the internet, and to be continued.